Good evening. It's Drake Griggs with Obsidian Wisdom. I'm thankful we could be together for another Retirement Readiness Thursday. In today's case study, we're going to hang out and discuss what would I do if I received $500,000 inheritance. And so, in this particular case study, what you're going to see is this is a widower. He is 62 years old. His wife had passed and ended up leaving $500,000 in a taxable brokerage account. And when we say brokerage account, that's just a very fancy way of saying it's in a regular investment account, like a Robinhood or an E-Trade or something at Charles Schwab, something that's already been taxed once, and then you're investing the money. Not It's called a non-qualified account. So qualified would be something that's like your 401k, your 403b, different things like that. And so this is something that does not have a tax deduction that we are paid up front. And so that ends up changing what the strategy is, where you'll find out where the money is at when you receive it. That matters a lot when you're talking about receiving an inheritance. If the money is in an IRA or 401k, then that money hasn't been taxed yet. And depending on whether you're the spouse or you're a sibling or something like that, it can really change how much you're going to be taxed, how many years you have, but it will be, taxed as ordinary income. So in this particular case, what happens when you receive the income from your spouse, you're able to get what's called a step up. And it's a very fancy way of saying that the $500,000. So I probably can, let me just place it on a whiteboard. I think it'll make it a little bit easier if I place it on the whiteboard for you. So let me go to the whiteboard. I'll share this tab. Okay. So the way it would normally work whenever you receive an inheritance, what happens is depending on who it's from and how it's been taxed, and if anyone's paid taxes, you can sometimes receive a step up. And so what we're saying is because this is one spouse to another spouse and it's in a brokerage account, Uncle Sam is allowing you to receive the full step up, which you and I would be very happy for. And so let's go here. So what happened is the wife has the account and she put in 250K. The account then grew, so it increased another 250K. So that gives us 500K as the balance. This is what we would call our basis. So Uncle Sam, whenever we receive something that he considers our investment in something, he generally allows us to not be taxed on that, right? So if I put in $250,000, Uncle Sam considers that almost like me buying a house. Like that's how much it costs for you to get this investment started. So I'm not going to tax you the amount that you invested. Now, what ends up happening, because it's your spouse, so what happens is the husband receives that 500K and he gets what's called a step up in basis. So what that means is if he takes this money and he was to sell it, that it would be considered as if he had $500,000 that he placed in the account. So it's like none of the growth is considered taxable for him because he gets the step up in his basis. This is pretty nice. We're very excited by that. Uncle Sam is very nice when we talk about passing things from one spouse to the other. High level, the reason he does that is because, in his opinion, if you were two incomes and now one of you has passed, now you're one income. I don't know how well your retirement works with just one income. So if I tax it as if you're two separate people instead of treating you as one unit, maybe I tax you so much that it then has you on like a government program or something like that. So when Uncle Sam sees that it's a spouse, he's like, okay, I'm going to allow you to have a step up in basis. So that way you can avoid paying capital gains on the growth. So you don't have to worry about that. So Uncle Sam is trying to make sure that you're not going to run out of money from being taxed. Not that he cares all the time, but when it's money out of his pocket, he cares a little bit more. And so that's the idea. He's like, I don't want to take too much from this person because if I was to tax this at capital gains, and then depending on how much it is, so let's just say it was like 20%. And so 10% would have been 25,000. So 20% would have been 50,000. So you would have taken 50K out. And then you have 200K that's left. Uncle Sam's like, I don't know what would have happened. Maybe this person runs out of money, messes with their retirement. Now they need all Social Security. And so he gives you the step up. And so that's pretty nice. If this was a situation where it's not your spouse and it was like your brother left you something or sister left you something, then no, all bets are off. You don't get you don't get that extra benefit. So Uncle Sam would be interested in making sure that you get taxed on that. And he's very nice because it's already been taxed once. So let's go through the case study. So when I say that all up front, basically what I'm saying is once you receive the money from a taxable brokerage account and it's your spouse and they pass early into retirement, so right, they're both in their 60s, you are not going to be like, well, I should do Roth conversions. That's what I heard, right? This isn't one of those situations. We're not doing any Roth conversions on this one because we don't have to worry about the taxes on it because you're the spouse. The question becomes, where do I put the money? And so for this particular plan, and what you'll notice in this strategy, what we basically decided to do is it made the most sense for us to sit there and say, all right, well, maybe what I should do is pay off the house. And I'll show you what that looks like. They had like 6 years left, and it was about $90,000 that was left on the house, right? So I have 500K. I just take off a quick 90K, pay off the house. Don't have to worry about that anymore. That's a possible strategy. Maybe, maybe not. I'll show you what that looks like. Another option would be like, well, maybe I just invest all of it. I live off that extra interest, where if I'm getting 4% on 500K, then I know that, let me just do the math real quick, 4% on 500K is 20,000 a year. I'm just going to add that to my normal pension. This is a retired teacher, so he had a pension. Maybe I'll do that. I just don't touch the principal. I leave it in there. I just add the 20,000 and then I ride off into the sunset. Right, that's also an option, and we'll take a look and see what that one looks like as well for him. But ultimately, the decision becomes, what do I do with that money? Do I pay off my debt? Do I just try to live off it and not mess with anything? How do I make that decision? And we'll go through a few of those choices that you would make when you receive an inheritance from a spouse who recently a widower. And so we'll go through the case study. So in this one, we had investments. That was the 500K that we received, had 89,000 in a loan. As far as the mortgage, car was paid off. I think it was a 2018 Camry. And then in the property, it was 375,000 was worth, with 89,000, 90,000 that was left on it. And so that was it. No debt. All the debt was already gone, just the mortgage that was left. And then we had the pension as the income. With the pension as the income, that we just didn't have anything else. There was no other investments outside of the pension. So the pension is 28K, and that's what you receive every year. It is an older pension. So we had one of those where you have the cost of living adjustment, which is kind of nice. You don't have that as much anymore. Most companies are removing that. And so then it makes more sense, if you don't have a COLA, that you need to add some investments to be able to keep up with inflation. And I'll show you what that looks like when we go through the way we allocated the investments on the 500K, so that we have the income that we're able to maintain so that they have a successful retirement. So in this particular one, he had, I believe it was 40K as his cost basis. So that's what Uncle Sam was like, all right, cool. That's the portion that I'm not going to tax that income from your pension on, because that's what you paid in, right? We just talked about the cost basis on the other one, how you get the step up. So all of it was considered not taxable because it was all considered from the step up, that was your money. And this one, it was 40K. And when the amount that was in there to give him his monthly income is like 2,300, so around there, that means it's basically exclusion ratio is 6%. And so we talked about the exclusion, just as it sounds, it's just like, hey, that's the percentage of the annuity payment that you get that's not taxable, because that was your cost. You placed that money in there. It wasn't the growth. It wasn't from the employer. It was your actual money. And so that would mean that 6% of his monthly payment would not be considered taxable, that's his cost basis. But then the other 94% would be considered taxable. And it is something to think about. He did have the survivor benefit, and we'll talk about other things you could do. But unfortunately for him, right, the spouse had passed before, so he ends up losing out on that. And I'll go through really quickly. Let me show you what that will look like. So let me erase this real quick. And so if you ever have a pension, so you're probably going to be, most of the time, you're going to be someone who's working for the government. You're going to be a firefighter, police officer, you're going to be military. Most of the time, that's going to be your pension. Maybe work at the post office, the teacher. That's probably going to be how it's allocated. There maybe 20% of private companies still offer a pension, but most of us don't. And so when you're looking at this, let's go through. Let's see what the number was that I was getting ready to write down, because it was just that quick that I lost it. I lost my train of thought. Okay, that's what I was doing. All right, so the way it would work is, normally in a pension, And just to make life easy for us, this is going to be the same if you have an annuity. An annuity and a pension are the same thing. Just one is offered through your employer, and one you just purchase directly from the insurance company. But the insurance company is the one that structures and offers it to the employer, and then you receive it, or to you, and then you just buy it from the insurance company. It's the same either way. And so the way it would work is normally you have three options. So number one, you have life only. And if you have life only, you would receive the largest amount because you are sharing the risk with the insurance company. That if the day you annuitize and you pass the day after that, that's it. All the money that you placed in the account, 600,000, 700,000, $1 million, it's all gone. You are sharing that risk with them. Because of that, they give you the highest payout because it's a real possibility. Like, look, you literally could give your pension, give your annuity $1 million, and then it pays out $2,000 a month for 2 or 3 years. You haven't gotten nearly back the amount of money that you put in. So in that case, they give you the largest amount. If you're someone who says, that sounds a little scary, Trey, are there any ways to protect myself from that type of risk? And I would say, yes. You can have what's called a period certain. And period certain is just as it sounds. It means that there's 10, 20, heck, I've seen some that say 30 years. It's a period certain. No matter what happens, insurance company, that if something happens to me tomorrow, oh well, you have to pay someone that I'm related to at least a payment for 10 years. Like, you have to find that person. Now, obviously, I recommend you giving them the person to make it easy for everybody. But like, someone has to be paid out a minimum of 10 years, a minimum of 20 years, a minimum of 30 years. Because you have decreased some of your risk. So the chance of you getting nothing has slimmed down. Then they may pay you, and this will be closer to the 10-year than the 20. Right. The larger the amount, the smaller this gets. But if you have like a 10-year period certain, then I'll pay $1,500 a month. The insurance company says, look, I have a little bit more risk now. There is no guarantee that I could just get lucky and I pay you for 1 year and I keep the rest of your money. At a minimum, I have to pay you for 10 years. And because of that, I'm going to decrease how much the payout is, right? Like, that's the idea. In this one, you have like a joint, you could do like a joint life. So the idea is it's me and my spouse. So if something happens to me, you're going to pay my spouse either, actually, I didn't mean to do it that way. You'll pay my spouse maybe 100% of what the amount is. You will pay my spouse maybe 50% of what the amount is. You technically can pay them 75%. You'll just choose something like that. Look, no matter what, if something happens to me, you have to take care of my spouse. Then they'll say, sure, no problem. It just means that now I'm insuring 2 lives. So you're taking so much less risk. I'm going to cut it in half. So you're going to receive like $1,000 a month. The issue with this is once you make the choice is made. So you can't call the insurance company up and be like, hey, I chose the joint life. You know, it was with my spouse. My spouse passed first. Can I change it to the life only? They're going to be like, no, you can't change it. Right. So you have locked in that. And so this person's up losing that $1,000 a month for however many years that they will live through. And that's why sometimes what people will do is they will have some form of money that's outside of the pension. So that way they would get the life only. So they receive the most, but then maybe they would get life insurance on the husband. So the idea here is, look, life only. So if something was to happen to me, don't worry. You're going to get the life insurance policy of whatever, like 500K policy, 250K policy, whatever the amount is. So that way, if we both live a very long time, that's great. We're going to receive the $2,000 a month, not $1,000 a month. But if something does happen to me that was unexpected, it's okay because we have a fail-safe. You do just have the 500,000. You take that amount, you'll invest that. Boom, you can invest that in an annuity, and then you can have your own pension. But it just gives you a chance to say, well, what if it happens a little bit differently? Like I've given up $1,000 a month, but what if the spouse passes first before me? Or what if we both just live a really long time? I've lost $1,000 a month times however many years. So that's what some people can do. Now, this one wasn't that type of a situation. So we didn't with it. It just wasn't designed that way. But I did want to show you what some of those options would look like. So that's what they have. Right. So that's the pension that we have. And then that's all the income he has. He has the cost of living adjustment added to it. And he just didn't invest, he didn't, want to invest in anything outside of that. So there's no contributions to anything else. And then the expenses pre-retirement about 2,300, and then you add on the mortgage and the car. So just something, if you haven't seen me go through a case study, it keeps it from double counting. So we have the mortgage payment here. Right, so mortgage payment is 1,200 a month, and so it's calculated there. And then when I come on to the tab with the expenses, is basically what's left. So you would combine the two. So they have about $3,500 a month is what the expenses are. We have a pension that's already at $2,300 a month, and so we would need to figure out how to bridge the rest of that gap. So we need to be able to pay off. We need about another $1,200 a month. And so based off of that by itself, you can see, yeah, if that's the case, Dre, then yes, that math will be mathing, because you already said if it was 4% of 500,000, well, that's $20,000 a year, which means that ultimately we're going to have that extra $1,200 that we would need. Like, we're going to be okay. And you're right. If that was a choice that we wanted to make, we could totally do that. Now, because we're not 65 yet, we don't have access to Medicare. So that's what you go on the Affordable Care Act exchange. It gives you your monthly payment, and then that's what you'd have for health insurance. So for David, that was $800 a month. That would be his monthly payment. So we added that in there, and then that goes until he turns 65, right? So that's when that expense ends. We increase it with general inflation because that does increase. Healthcare expenses do increase in cost, and then that's how we set the plan up, right? So very simple. It was a pension income, and so how do we get to the success of like 90%? And I'm glad that you asked. So let's go through it. So for the investments, when we met, we already were relatively conservative. So we were trying to keep everything kind of low, and I understand that, especially when we talk about pensions. That's just how pensions generally are invested. They make their money off of the pool of people. Some live longer, some live shorter, so they get to keep the money. Insurance companies, so they're not really going to invest it very risky or things like that. And so then all we basically added to that was a balanced approach. So we were a little bit more on the risk averse side. So we have a balanced approach. Normally, what you would do, what you would consider, a lot of times you would just do a traditional 60-40. High level, the way you would decide that is you would take basically how old you are, then that would be the percentage that you would consider putting in your safe investments, right? Obviously within reason, because if you're 80, you shouldn't have 80% of your money out of the market. But that's the idea. It just lets me know where I should be around, just a very quick and dirty way. That if I'm 30 years old, then 30% of my investments being safe and then 70% being invested aggressively sort of makes sense for 30-year-old. But if I'm 50, then I probably shouldn't have it as a 70-30. Maybe it does make sense to have 50% of my investments safe. And then once I'm 60, then having 60% of my investments safe, right? Like, that's the idea. Like, it's not a 1-for-1, but it just gives you this idea of I should be getting a little bit more protective of my money as I get closer and closer to retirement. And so for this particular one, based on the risk tolerance and things like that, it made sense to have a 50-50 balanced approach. So we were a little bit on the conservative, which was totally fine because it still worked for him. So let's go through what we ultimately decided to do. So it made sense for us based on just the conversations that we're having. We actually thought it made sense to just pay off the mortgage. And so that is what we ended up doing. And so the way we just modeled it out, right? So we had $90,000 left, paid basically an extra $10,000 a month. It just models it out so that we basically paid it off in 1 year, right? You have $90,000, extra $10,000 a month. It's going to be gone in 1 year. So once you got rid of that, we still had $400,000 left. We didn't have to worry about the taxes because we had the step up bases. And so we were able to start just moving the money to get rid of some of the expenses. What that did is it basically set us now level where his monthly expenses matched his pension. And because he had the cost of living adjustment, because his pension was a little bit older, it gave him the ability to now afford his lifestyle for the rest of his life. And so we now have the floor. And that's sort of how I normally look at the pension. Now, if you've been hanging out with me any amount of time, you know that I lean towards the three bucket strategy, right? Like that's my leaning. So let me show you what it would look like. So for the three bucket strategy, you would have a percentage of your investments that we would consider safe. You'd have a percentage of your investments that we would consider focusing on income, and that would be your moderate investments. And then we have a percentage of our investments that we would consider focusing on growth. And then our growth would just be like we're investing for gold. The reason this works is because we normally have 1 to 2 years of living expenses in this one. So this is going to be cash, your money market account, could be CDs, cash and cash equivalent. And because I have 1 to 2 years of living expenses, this now gives me the ability to wait out any of those recessions, right? Even if you think back to 2008 recession, you think back to COVID, even if you think back in 2025 to the first quarter when we lost $6 trillion in the market from all the uncertainty around the tariffs and stuff. But then when the second quarter started, everything kind of made its way back. If you have 2 years, 1 to 2 years runway, more times than not, you're going to be able to outlast the recession, which means you don't have to sell your investments when the market is struggling, because that is what causes us, right? Sequence of returns, other fancy language. But all we're saying is if you're taking your money out and your money is losing value, it's like you're losing double the money. And as a result, your retirement, you'll see the little line starts to decrease significantly. So if we give ourselves 2 years, most market uncertainty is going to be past the worst point. That even if you think 2 years from the Great Recession of '08, by you'd be like 010, we were slowly starting to get jobs back. We stopped bleeding and things like that, but we weren't really growing until like 2012. That's why normally you have the second bucket, which is your income bucket. And so my income bucket is normally going to be somewhere in that 3 to 8 year range. And then for this one, I focus on any of that. So you could be investing in dividends, and we would normally be investing in blue chips, like very large companies that just won't go away. You could be investing in bonds. And so that could be corporate bonds, it could be government bonds. Here you can have your annuity, right? So like your pension, anything like that, right? The idea of this bucket is I just want it to keep up with inflation. So I'm okay with this bucket just being somewhere in that, like, actually, let me do it this way. You would really want it to be somewhere in that 2 to 4% range. That's what you're shooting for with this bucket. We don't want home runs, so we're lowering the volatility, which then means that I don't have to be afraid of selling these investments as much, right? I still have the window, but I have 3 to 8 years. So this is my 1 to 2 years. As my 1 to 2 years living expenses starts decreasing, I will sell or I'll replenish, and I'll refill that up. So you have your dividend investments and your blue chips, you can have your bonds, you can have your annuities. I've seen some people will put their REITs in this bucket. That was probably a little bit riskier. There are some of them that maybe you could choose, but high level, I would probably consider REITs to be in the growth. That's just me, but everybody's a little bit different. And so you're basically like your moderate bucket is just, I just want to keep up with inflation. Your annuity, more times than not, it's just keeping up with inflation. You're not trying to hit home runs with annuity. So you have your annuities, your pensions, your blue chip companies. At the end of the day, right, you can't grow that much larger, right? Like Google, it's growing, but is it growing the same way that like an Amazon or a newer company would say? No, not the same way. So that's the idea of the income bucket. And then your growth bucket, because that is going to be where your volatility is, you normally need 10 plus years. And so if you give yourself 10 plus years, this is the one that we would like ideally to be beating inflation. So for this one, we want at a minimum 5% because I need to beat inflation or higher, right? 5% or higher. My goal in my growth bucket is to beat inflation. And you know that 65% of millionaires have at least 3 streams of income, and those are going to be normally found in 3 asset classes. So your own personal business, you can have some real estate, and you have your investments in the stock market. Now, this one, you can have individual stocks, and you can go for it. You can be in emerging markets if you want to go for that. You're probably like, wait, what, Dre? I know. We'll save it for another day. We won't go into it too much, but you can be in emerging markets. That's going to be outside of the United States. It's going to be some up and coming countries that are considered developing countries. And if you find a good company in a developing country, it obviously it's going to grow. It's going to grow a lot. But the hard part is their courts are different, their system is different, intellectual property is treated differently. There's just a lot of research that goes into that. That's why it's considered so aggressive because you don't really know. And then you have your commodities. So any of these investments in here, they should be able to give me at least that 5%. I should be able to beat inflation with all these investments. But because they do have that volatility, they do have those down parts of the market, I need a lot more time to allow those investments to recover. And so if you give yourself at least 10 years in this one, the idea is when I'm having good economic environments, I then sell. And when I sell here, I start buying my dividends, my blue chips, my bonds, my treasuries. I buy all of those things that are probably just basically keeping up with inflation. I buy those. These are probably going to be doing okay. And then as they're doing okay, I will sell those and buy my safe. And then this works for anyone. It just works for anyone because it doesn't really matter how close or far you are from retirement. We decide the risk based on the percentage that we put in each of these buckets. So for this particular case, right at 62 years old, it would not be unreasonable to have maybe like 30% in your growth. And so, right, we're talking about basically the 400K that's left. So if you have 30% in your growth, you can then have 30% focusing on income. And then they can have 40% that's considered right safe for their living expenses because we've already paid off the mortgage. So we're just really trying to have the same lifestyle, but with a little bit of expenses covered. So we'll go into the goals where it's like we just need to make sure we have the money to cover the goals. Now, with that said, we could have, if we wanted to keep the house and not really even worry about it, right? If you have that peace of mind, this person was a little bit more on the risk averse side, so we just got rid of the mortgage. Then you could have this income, and then you could pay off the mortgage because you're going to be able to generate the income. You should be able to with this allocation to pay the mortgage, and then just pays the mortgage. You write off the interest and rainbows and skittles. Everything's fine. But you have either option that's available for you. For him, it made more sense for his peace of mind. Boom, mortgage is paid off. Now I know my pension covers my current lifestyle, and then the investments that's left from the inheritance that I don't have to worry about the taxes because I had to step up. Now I'm able to just use that, right? And so that's what we use to be able to fund the lifestyle. Hopefully that makes sense for you. Hopefully that does. Does that make sense? Hopefully it does, right? Give me a thumbs up if it makes sense. So that's what we ended up doing for this particular situation. So then I'll bring you back. So the tax strategy, and we didn't end up actually doing anything because, like I mentioned to you, because we had the step up, we didn't really have to do any Roth conversions. That is, depending on where the money is at, that is just one of those options that's available. If the money is in a 401k, a 403b, or an IRA, some pre-tax account, and you have to pay taxes on it anyways, then maybe it makes sense to just go ahead and pay the taxes and move it into a tax-free investment. Man, that's what I would do, right? Everybody's a little different. But if I have to pay taxes anyways, for example, if Uncle Sam's like, look, you got 10 years to take this money out, and you're like, all right, cool, I'll divide it by 10 years and I'll take out that amount each year. If you have to take it out anyways and pay taxes on it, why not just pay the taxes and move it into a Roth account so that way you don't have to pay taxes again? Because if you move it into a regular investment or brokerage account, or it's even like your checking account, whenever you take the money out and you invest it, you'll end up paying taxes, right? So if I took the money out and place it in the stock market, when I take the money out of the stock market, I'll pay capital gains taxes. If I take the money out and I purchase a business, then I'll pay taxes when I file my corporate returns on my business income. If I take the money out and buy real estate, same idea. I'll pay taxes on the rental income. Now the taxes is much more favorable, but what's more favorable than free, my friend? Right? So tax free. That's what I would do. But this one we didn't have to worry about that. We already received it because of the step up, so we didn't have to worry about the taxes. So we ended up having to do that. The retirement spending smile, that's just generally how most people's spending patterns are. And so what we end up doing is basically we spend a lot early in retirement because we have all the cool things that we want to do. And then we start slowing that down because we're like, look, I've done that. I've got 2 t-shirts. Life is great. I'm okay. I just want to chill, volunteer a little bit, hang out with my grandkids, whatever that looks like. Like I just want to chill a little bit more. And then normally around the end of retirement, we end up spending more because we have a lot more healthcare expenses. And so that's normally how most of us are. So that's why we have the retirement spending smile here. We use the income from the inheritance so that we didn't have to take Social Security out. Now, as always, it depends on a variety of situations, like what's going on in your life, things like that. But because we have the pension income and we have paid off the mortgage, us adding Social Security would be able to say, all right, now like we're great, like we're golden as far as this particular case study. And so what we ended up doing is we said, all right, well, if we're going to live off of the 400K that's left, where your pension is covering, and then your inheritance is being used for all of your wants, and I'll show you what that looks like, then we don't need to touch Social Security, right? Like that's just the truth. We don't need to touch it. Now, some people will say, well, Dre, I put the money in and, something happened to, my sister or my cousin. And so I'm taking it immediately at 62. That's fine. Like you can totally do that. Now, I'm just simply telling you that we didn't need to touch it and we're okay not touching it. So we allowed it to keep growing, grows by like 8% every single year. And now when we're 70, we have the pension that's going up with the cost of living. Then we have Social Security now that's covered. And when you put those together, we're already covering now our wants and our desires, and we still have the inheritance. But we did spend down the inheritance during the 62 to 70, so that way we could have the Social Security for the rest of our life. And then we would just go from there. And so that was where that made the most sense for them in this particular situation. But as always, it depends a little bit on everyone. And so when you receive an inheritance, you really do have to start kind of putting the pieces in place. Like, do I have to pay taxes on it? How many years do I have before I have to spend it down? Can I move it somewhere? If I have to pay taxes now, can I move it somewhere where I don't have to pay taxes later? Or can I move it somewhere that I pay less taxes? All these would be questions that you really want to kind of think through when you're deciding. But for this one, retired teacher, widowed early, had a pension that had the cost of living adjustment, so we didn't have to go for gusto. We were able to just be very strategic and play it very safe. Like, hey, go ahead and pay off the house. Now you don't have any debt. We'll put some money aside so that way you can, and I'll show it to you. We'll put some money aside so that you can get a car. So we said the car would be like $25,000 in today's value. We have it increased with general inflation. And then 2033, right? Car, he has a free and clear 2018. We're like, yeah, we should probably put in a plan to make sure you can have a new car. He said he wants to travel. He said every other year, I think I'd want to travel starting at 64. We're like, cool, man, let's do that. Goes up with general inflation into the plan. So we're saying we did that all the way out till 90. Wants to gift his grandchildren. He said about $2,000 a year. He did not want that to increase with inflation. That was just the amount that he was comfortable giving. And so if he changes his mind, we'll come back in here and we'll change it. But currently he said, I just want to do $2,000 every single year. And that's what we did. Just wants to give cash to them. And you don't have to file any gift taxes or anything. And I think it's $18,000 for 2025, as you're able to give to someone without having to worry about any of that. The annual healthcare expenses, that's just kind of what it is on average. The retirement expenses, when you paid off the mortgage, drops them down to about $2,000 a month. Retired at 62, so we're fine. The only one that I showed them what it looks like, so I'll show you what it looks like. Is basically like the long-term care, right? 7 out of 10 people, 65 and older, will have at least one long-term care episode. It's about $150,000 on average over the life of your retirement, right? It's about 3 years on average. And so what this is basically saying, like, hey, look, we're taking the long-term care. This is the average of it. And then you would choose the version that you'd want. Do you want them to be in home visit, like in home care, where they come out to you and they help you? Assisted living, maybe you drive somewhere and they just like physical therapy type. They help you a little bit. And then you go back home when you're ready. Or is it like a nursing home where you have 24/7 around the clock care? Choosing which one of those will change the cost, right? So obviously you would imagine 24/7 coverage in a nursing home would be more. And then assisted living, I would expect that to be a little bit less. But you can see that if I have someone personally come into my house, I would expect that to be more than an assisted living facility. But then right? So those costs, you would expect them to be. And then normally what we would do is we would then decide what frequency would that be. If that's what you pay each year, how many times would you be able to pay that word before it would mess up our retirement? And so for this particular part, it was like, Trey, I appreciate it. Let's remove it, right? It's your plan. Like, you're the driver. I'm just helping you. I'm your guide. But if you wanted to see what it looked like, I commonly will leave it in there for the last 2 years, right? 89, 90. It's probably okay to say that we might have some long-term care expenses. And you can see how it does impact the plan. That if you have to, right, because it's multiple factors, and we'll go through them. But if you had a long-term care event that happens at the end of your retirement, it's not $75,000 anymore, right? So it's basically what it would be times the inflation. So your healthcare expenses, they generally go up at a minimum 3%, but it's very more likely that inflation in college, they outpace inflation. It's more like 6%. So you had to take that $75,000 today and multiply it by 6% every single year for the next 30 years, right? Because we're saying that this is going to be around 90. He's 60 now. So we're saying in 30 years, what would that cost be? And what we generally know is every 20 years, an average of a 3% increase would double. And so we're saying that it's $75,000 today. Then we're saying when this person in 20 years is 82, it would be $150,000 for the same care. So you can sort of see how it becomes relatively expensive. Long-term care is definitely an expensive thing. And so normally what we'd have to do is one of two things. Either one is we have a portion of our allocations to cover long-term care, just like we have a portion to cover our trips and our travel. We have a portion to cover our golf memberships or pickleball or boat club membership. You have a portion to cover your health expenses for long-term care. We know that it's on average, it's going to be about $150,000 over the life of your retirement. So then you would have $150,000 ish today, and then you would invest that portion in a way to grow and outpace. And so we could, right? We could do something like that. We're saying, hey, look, you have 500,000. We took 100,000, paid your mortgage, take the other 150,000, and we would invest that portion slightly more aggressively to outpace long-term care expenses of healthcare. Right? We could totally do that. That's all that you're really seeing there. So we're saying that the price isn't $75,000 in 30 years, that it would probably be like $225,000 is closer to what it would be if you took the doubling in 20 years and then it would basically half again. And so, but he was like, no, take the long-term care out. I'm be fine. I got my kids, yada, yada. And I was like, cool, no problem. And so I did want to show you just what that would look like for you personally. All right. And so on that, my friends, we are right. We are all good. So if you have any questions for me, you can place them in there. I did want to invite you, if you found value in this, and you're like, dude, I would just love to be able to learn a little bit more. I do want to invite you to come to our Worry Free Wednesday. I do it live every Wednesday. I go through the 5 hidden dangers of successful retirement, and then I give you 3 frameworks to overcome them. So that way you'll be good to go. And then from there, you can decide whether you want to work with me further in our firm. It's completely up to you. We're just here to provide value, but obviously keep us in mind if someone is like, hey, do you know someone that can help us with retirement planning? Like, yeah, actually, I do. There's this Dre guy. So what you do is you go to obsidianwisdom.com, right? So our website, and then you can just click on I want a worry-free retirement. You click on any of them, it'll take you to the same place. And then it'll take you to a page where you can sign up, and it always has the next one. So it's every single Wednesday at 5:30 p.m. And then so it's about an hour of your time, maybe like an hour and 20 minutes, depending on the questions that you would have at the end. But that's normally how it goes. And so I just go through and I give you the step-by-step plan to overcome those 5 challenges. You would just sign up. The next one will be in 5 days, 20 hours, 44 minutes, and counting seconds. Isn't that crazy? All right. I'm always thankful for the time that we have together. I do not take it for granted. I think I appreciate you. You can do anything with your time. So many competing goals, and yet you spend it with me. So always, and I'm thankful. Until next time, stay safe and enjoy life.